Billy, you seem to have completely mastered the fingerboard. What can you tell us about the shapes and the patterns you use to connect the neck up?
Well, I doubt if mastered is the word, but
oh, looks like it.
Stumbled upon some form of understanding of it. When I play a particular scale, like we touched on in the last video, I have certain patterns that I use, like for a G major scale. For me, when I play, again, to reiterate, when I play a pattern in one position, like for the G major scale, like I did right there, I do all the notes that you can do in a G major scale in that position, which would also include this low F sharp, even though it isn't really part of that scale, just because it's contained in there, and it's a note that your finger can go to in that scale, so I do it. So actually, a G major scale for me then would be. Right. So I get them all in there. So now, another type of scale, the only other type of scale that I know of actually is a pentatonic scale.
Well, wait a minute, though. You could get minor off the major. So.
Yeah, because it's, major and minor I consider pretty much.
And you're pretty fluid with both sounds, major and minor, and you're playing.
Well, that's pretty much because they're both really the same thing.
Right, so you can parlay that.
Yeah, just as a G major scale. Right. In G is a minor.
Exactly.
Is an E minor, a form of the E minor modes or scale.
Right.
You help me out with this.
So you have both facets of it and contained in that scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now the pentatonic is kind of major and minor free. It's kind of an oriental. So what it is, actually, when I do it, I also try to do it all the way across the neck. So we're doing 2 notes per string.
Let me ask you, because it's a 5-note scale, that's why we're limited to basically 2 notes in the positions as opposed to 3.
Good point. Actually, I forgot all about that, but you're totally right. So now if you take part of that pattern, put it together, this is G major chord. So if you're playing guitar and you had 2 extra strings there, it would be a for real G major chord. So now you know that is a pattern of a chord, and it's made up of those component notes. Now if you take the pattern that chord makes, in this case we'll move this finger up to there.
Right.
Even that sounds rather dissonant. It is. It's a non-resolved something or other.
Well, it's a G with A in the bass.
Yeah, it's a G with A in the bass.
Needs resolution, though, you're right.
Yeah, right. New Year's resolution. Anyway, so there's a G major scale. Now if I take the top notes of that pattern, here comes the bottom notes of the next position. Now here, there's so we're back up to the octave. So what I'm doing there is I'm trying to show the top note of each position of a pentatonic scale makes a pattern, which in itself is a chord, basically.
Right, of some type.
Yeah, that I don't know the names of.
It could change depending on what's behind you, harmonically.
Yeah, so, okay, that's your department, I guess.
Okay.
I'll just play it, you explain it. But the song that I did with Mr. Big called Had Enough.
Right.
When I was learning the modes on guitar, the E minor mode, it actually formed a chord by the lower parts of it. And when I strummed that chord, and I actually did all of the chords made up of that mode, it actually seemed to make a reasonable facsimile of kind of a song-y type of thing.
Okay, well, let's see what that's like on the guitar, if you wouldn't mind demonstrating that.
Yeah, hand me that little boy over there, and I'll see what we can do with it here. Anyway, the idea, when I was practicing guitar, learning a couple things to write some songs, and I read a lot on guitar, but which sounds like an Allman Brothers song, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It has that country flavor to it.
Anyway, so I noticed that that chord that made was part of all those notes there. It became it became part of the.
So you derived those chords from the mode.
Right. So it's an E minor kind of mode. So that fits all any pattern. I always wonder how these jazz guys got these amazing chords all over the place, because they understand scales so well.
Exactly.
That they can put any configuration of notes together and come up with an amazo chord thing. So you see these jazz guys doing all these comping chord stuff, and I always wonder, how in the world do they ever learn all those chords? Well, they just basically know their stuff, and they know their scales, and they know their modes, and they know how to put them all together in lightning fast, and
that relates exactly to what you're talking about, connecting all the shapes.
Right. So what I'm doing basically is just like, so now if I take like a G major, the pentatonic version. So I know if I'm in G. All those. It's all in G. So if I'm playing in the key of G, it's easy to find a spot to go to, because you know that's your spot. And then you just do variations, part of one, part of another.
Now, do you visualize the note G somewhere in those shapes?
Sometimes I do. Like, for example, G major. If I got that note in the middle, this is kind of the simple way I did it when I first started, but it actually still holds true to this day, for me anyway. 2 whole steps here, 2 whole steps here, and 2 whole steps on the string underneath. If that's your root, you know that if you got a string above it and below it, and it's ridiculously simple, but it helps you to get a start on the idea of having a pattern and having some place to go. So now, similarly, any of those notes, of those 9 notes, work with that.
Various combinations can be created. Yeah.
All basically in the key. You can, of course, I'm stretching a point, and I don't understand it musically enough to really explain it in those terms, but I'm explaining it in pattern terms.
Exactly.
So now once you know that there's your, okay, so that pattern works up here, or if you have enough fret.
But what note is your reference note to? The G there.
The G. So now you know anytime you have a key anywhere, again, ridiculously simplistic, if your key is like, you know, that, you know that if you're in a major, you know that your pattern around that is such. Of course, there's a million other patterns around it within the context of a major scale. But
so all these things are movable, and they remain symmetrical.
They remain relatively the same. So if you have a particular note, and it's a major scale, and it starts and it has that note there in it, you know that you've got all those notes around it that you can go to play if you so desire.
So it's really a matter of being selective then with the notes. Once you've accumulated a lot of them, you become selective with what you play out of those patterns.
Exactly. So now instead of just doing it rote pattern thinking, once you're used to moving in those patterns, and you can kind of just step back and let that little machine you created with your hands kind of direct it from like a remote control thing.
Like directing the machine, the analogy you made speaking earlier about how you use scales.
Yeah, basically you just create a hand that does all the moves, and then you sit back and kind of with your little remote control, like you would a little race car or something, and make it work around. That's pretty much how I play, because I don't really think about the scales I'm doing. I don't think about what's going on. I'm just kind of reaching into the cosmos or the ozone or whatever zone that it happens to be, and trying to find some areas there that kind of relay what I'm feeling and thinking at the time, or you know, on stage or in the studio, whatever. But to give you an idea, all those notes that I played are those 9 notes that work around this G included. If you're just...
Are there some specific areas of movement that are better than others in connecting these shapes?
Well, you get used to certain moves with your hands. Like for a long time, for many years, that was my move. So whenever I was solo, if it was an E minor, which is the relative minor to G major. so I would really be stuck into that pattern for a long time. So I finally forced myself to break out of it and make myself do a lot of other things. So the idea of it here, the final analysis of what I'm talking about is, once you understand a shape, and you understand that from one note you've got all these moves you can go to, all these different notes, and you have a one stable spot to find is that is your note. That's the key you're in. Now usually, like when I first started bass, it's like, okay, I got a G here. I know this move. Paul Samuel Smith and the Yardbirds.
Exactly.
Then we used to do it up an octave. It's like, ooh, a whole different one. So you saw for like 2 or 3 years of my playing, it was just all in that one pattern. And then after a while, you learn to expand it more, and you have more patterns and more option notes to go from G. You can go to there, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one.
So are these shapes you would commonly call on in improvising?
Yeah, I guess in the beginning, when you're first starting to understand improvising, I guess you would work with shapes.
Right.
Eventually, you get to the point where you're not thinking shapes, you're thinking music. You're not thinking what scale you're doing, you're thinking, I have an emotion and here it is, via the bass. I look at learning the shapes and learning all the spots on the neck to understand, similar to in language, because music is in a way a language, learning a little bit of vocabulary. So you get kind of it's a building block. Sure, when you're in school, you got to learn spelling and vocabulary and sentence structure, and it's a drag and you hate it. And that's what this kind of is. Learning sentence structure, similar to learning the structure of the patterns. But once you know it, you can speak like we're speaking now.
Right.
And this is what music should be like.
Communication.
Just like I'm talking to you. Exactly. Where it's just effortless and a thinking pattern. Let it fly. And all that comes, the fluidity of being able to just play something, play something, just to play it, comes from just years of learning what in the world is going on in this space right here. It's a very small amount of space, but you have to understand the patterns and the tunings and all the things that different emotions and major and minor will give you and everything like that. Once you know that, then it becomes music again. So
it's all contained in those sets of intervals that we'd spoken about, their orders, and finally the patterns, how they recur.
Yeah, that's the technology of it.
Right.
In real life, you want to play it. Mm-hmm. So that's why instructing or explaining, this is not real life. This
you have to absorb it and recreate with
the foundation.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for building strength and endurance in practice periods, particularly, designed for stage use?
Yeah, whenever you have a move that you're doing, you have to pull it apart piece by piece. Find the weak spot and just isolate that. Like for me, for example, sometimes this finger lags behind the other ones. So I'll sit there and just do that finger
by itself?
For a while by itself, and then in context with that one. And then all three. And then reverse. And then reverse that way, and just do those two together, and then by itself, all different strings and every different combination, till you get this finger up to its normal strength again. So when you're having trouble, sometimes it's really hard to pull a lick apart because it goes by real fast, and you're not sure really what's wrong with it. So do it real slow. Take it, like...
How slow would you do it, for example, if you had to demonstrate that?
Like... Oh, you're doing a lick that's like...
Do it slower and harder as well, push harder.
Yeah, so you can kind of see which, because as you hear in there, there's like certain skip notes, and you really analyze it close, it's not quite right. When you're playing live a lot of stuff is blowing by and you don't really notice it. And you can have a lot of inconsistencies in your playing that you're not aware of. So a lot of times just to stop, slow down, go sit in a dressing room in a quiet room and work it out, and find the weak spot and pound on it. I guess it's basically, in order to prevent hurting yourself, and if you know a little bit about, I don't really know anything about bodybuilding, any kind of exercising thing like that, but if you talk to somebody who knows, and they'll tell you, like, you need to do a little warm-up period, and then work on it, and then back off and work on it again so you don't overstrain it and everything, So
it's tendinitis or whatever.
Yeah, so just keep, it's common sense, basically.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's move on to your thoughts on applying licks and parts of techniques to song. What can you tell us about, you know, the theory behind keeping it in check so that the song comes first and the
So you don't overplay.
Yeah, basically.
Well, you got the wrong guy for that, huh?
But it works. No, I mean, you keep
yeah,
yourself in check within the song context.
Yeah, if you listen to Paul McCartney's playing, he's playing all over the place. Tim Bogart, Jeff Berlin, Geddy Lee plays pretty busily. But it's a matter of, again, what we talked about when I was talking about patterns and stuff. Once you know the neck really well, you can move all around. If it makes musical sense, it will work. And if you know your stuff, because I've seen a lot of bass players also, which is like, you're flying all over the place. And it was one, but 90% of my playing is...
It's in the pocket. You're aware of the pocket.
You know, just right on, trying to keep the song happening. You get your spots to do it.
Right.
But try to, you know, to stick with what you're supposed to be doing to make the song sound like the song. So I would suggest for a young player to just, you know, play it with the band, make it work, and then add the frosting later.
Exactly. Now, what's your concept behind the secret notes that you're often reputed to play?
Ooh, secret note reputer.
Yeah.
Well, basically, it's just kind of a humorous term for moving the root note around underneath what the basic root of the song, the chord you're playing. Simplest example of it is when you're like doing the famous rock change. Stairway to Heaven,
Right.
Million Judas Priest, you know, millions of. Say the root note is E, go up to F sharp, and then to a G.
Aha. It's like substitute bass notes or other notes other than the root.
Right, so instead of... So it works because those notes are in that chord somewhere. But that's the simple version. We do, and now we're doing live, Blame It On My Youth. I'm like a... For the chorus part. So
Right.
when I go, Blame It On The Youth, I go up to the...
Aha.
Notice that, it's a B. I remember the first time I did it, Eric looked over and like, hey, what was that? Do it again,
Interesting
you know?
sound.
Yeah, so it's just when the guitar moves one way, you just move the other way, and you kind of make it automatic. That's basically the idea is just a kind of a rock perversion of what Bach does with moving bass lines.
Exactly.
If you want to get an idea what that is, just get a well-tempered clavier, which is just pieces by Bach with just solo piano or harpsichord. I prefer it with, because you can hear it much better. And you'll hear the bass line moving all over the place underneath the same melody line, and suddenly the melody line does not sound the same anymore because the bass line is different. That's the idea behind it.
Redefined.
Yeah. So whenever we're, you know, a lot of songs we're doing.
It's in Merciless too, isn't it?
Yeah, in just for that part.
Paul goes to a D sharp
Paul goes-
chord. Yeah. Right.
Oops, to the E. Well, I did that one night too.
Yeah.
But and whenever you make a mistake, just play it again. It'll sound like you meant to do it. So
That's a good rule to keep in mind.
I've done that many times, and then left it in the song because it actually worked after a while. So
Do you ever practice that at home too?
making mistakes. Oh, that's all I practice.
Getting out of them?
Oh, that's all I practice there. Right.
Well, now, in our first video, we established a core of pretty strong fundamental ideas. Let's talk about how you apply some of those ideas.
Okay.
I'm specifically referring to the beginning of the Had Enough song,
Okay.
where you play an intro bass solo.
Yeah.
It contains a lot of your interesting techniques.
When I first started seeing guys doing sweep things on guitar,
Right.
Paul Gilbert and people like that, Yngwie and stuff, doing sweep stuff, it was really intriguing. But as a finger player, so it was a little difficult for me to get, you know. So I learned a couple. But for me, that was a little awkward, so I had to think of a way to do kind of a sweep-sounding thing
Right.
that I could play while I'm standing up, while I'm running across the stage, while the monitors are feeding back, and you know. all the accompanying pitfalls that occur when you're playing live. So one of the things that came up was a way to, it's not a full, a wide bandwidth sweep, but it's a more compact version of it, but for me it's way more effective. And what that is I take like an E minor kind of figure there. So what I'm doing there basically is three things. I don't know how I came up with this, but it just kind of popped in. Kind of a flamenco.
Oh, like a roll.
Backwards. So I've got that basic, that plucking thing there. So there's your E minor. And then you hammer with that. Pull off, pluck, pluck. See what I'm doing there?
Similar to the Rasguiado technique.
Boy, if you say so. I have extra cheese maybe on that. But it's a bunch of techniques all together. Just hit the wrong note. So what I did is I went...
And you're outlining the E minor and C major sounds.
Because that's what the chords of the song.
So you're thinking the chords of the song already in the intro to your solo.
Yeah, because it kind of gives you the feel, sets it up, you know, so it's not such a big surprise when the song comes in.
Which is important. It should be integrated into the song, right? It shouldn't be a standalone solo that takes away from the song.
Can be. In this case, it isn't.
Yeah.
In this case, we stick with the song.
It's more structurally related.
Yeah, it can be structured. You know, there's no real rules as far as that goes, but some people like to try and keep things as much continuity, thread of continuity, which is cult of personality. So we got this thing here in E minor. I could resolve it by hitting the high E there, actually, but I'm hitting the D. So what I'm doing here on the C part of it, now when I'm hitting it, I'm hitting a fifth here.
Right.
So, and then, it's a kind of cool one.
Ending with two tapped fifths in a sense.
Yes. So it's
yeah, that is a combination of techniques.
Yeah, so there you have about three techniques in all. Now, what somebody could do with that probably from when they take it off this tape and use it, there's all kinds of chord patterns. You can use a...
Right.
There's all kinds of ways you can do that. So once you get that technique down, we can do that pluck. There's all kinds of variation you can do with it. A lot of times when I show people something or explain something that I've played, I'll come back and see some guy like about a year later, and he's like gone way off in left field and done all kinds of things that I never even thought of. So hopefully everybody that could pick up some portion or this whole thing, you know, a year from now, it will become their own, and you can do all kinds of stuff all down the neck with it. That's just, I do a couple variations on it too in my solos, but for the sake of time, that's basically where it comes from.
Would you show us the tap-on technique you use in Addicted to That Rush?
Yeah, that's basically, the thing starts out with like a trill. With the left hand doing a trill. Probably go like that's about like average speed. Some people do way faster, some people not as fast, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I managed to bring this one around and get it in between. So when it's going. It becomes just a blur of notes. Right. I stop, halt as a thing, and then we do that.
Oh, wait a second. Could you slow that down
Sure,
and break that down a bit for us?
Because it's really easy. There's nothing to it, really. It's very simple. A lot of times you see stuff go by fast, you think, oh, it's impossible, I'll never. But it's all so simple. It's almost embarrassing for me to show it because there's really nothing to it. That's basically all there is to it. So you're just taking the same move and just kind of moving it around within the framework of the key that you're in. Then, next string. Then.
almost have to be in two places at one time, though, don't you?
Yeah, because a lot of what passes for speed and agility is just basically the ability for one finger to get out of the way of the other one so it can do its thing. Because I'm never ever going any faster than, my fingers don't move any faster than for hammering on. So when you see, a lot of notes are going by, but it's not a lot of movement. The actual movement I'm doing is not a lot of hand movement, but it's just a coordination of the two. That's kind of a natural flow to it. And when you slow it down, take your time, and really do it slow, strong, so all the notes are even. When you speed it up, it becomes just kind of like turning on a faucet. It really kind of flow. Stuff like that.
Wasn't there a phrase in Addicted to That Rush after the solo that you talked about once as far as a good one to develop strength?
Yeah, the second one, when Paul and I do the second part of it,
that's the one, yeah.
It's really hard because for guitar players, the strings are lighter, and it's a lot easier to just kind of roll off the strings, and a lot of sound comes up. For bass, you really gotta pull that note there, which is kind of tough. Oof, there's that note again.
It's built into the bass.
There you go.
You know, that occurs to me that you're using shapes again.
Exactly. Now, all the stuff I said earlier about shapes applies here. G major, which is the key we're in. And then I forget what chord it goes to from there, but that's basically the...
Go back to the chorus.
That goes into the... But that's...
Which reminds me, you are also known for using chords a lot.
Yeah.
So you just played a couple. Could you tell us a little bit about the chords?
Yeah, when I'm playing...
style you've developed.
Yeah, when I'm playing live all the time, instead of just hitting a really hard part that's going to hit an A note, I always hit the whole... Many A notes as there are on the bass, because I've always played like three-piece bands, and as much noise, as much sound you can get in there, go for it. So, a lot of endings, instead of just a big, instead of that, hit the whole thing. As many notes that work in E as possible. So, that helps to kind of bring a three-piece band, an extra invisible guy along. So, for bass, as many chords as there are on any other instrument, only you're going to have to work with 4 notes. So, the basic major, minor, suspended, and then any variation thereof. But understand with the bass, to play a chord on it, you're going to have to really to stick with with fifths and octave sounding things, because you get into these that's not going to work really loud with a super bass amp. It's going to shake all over the place. It's not going to really work. Unless you're playing by yourself and it's quiet or something like that. So you have to always temper the idea of using an unusual chord or something with the idea, is it really practical, useful, and does it sound good? Right. Rather than trying to think, oh, technically it works, so I'll do, it doesn't always work. And when you're out in the audience watching and you don't know anything about bass or guitar, you just hear something where, somebody looks at each other and goes, this doesn't sound good. They don't know why, but it's just because you have to temper that with a little bit of, what is it, taste? Something like
that. the bass solo you actually play evolve?
Well, we used to do a song, Mr. Big, we used to play. Did that song by Free in his house in the old band. And he used to have this real hit that note though. It's just a little bass solo in between those changes. So one night I told the guys before I went on stage, it was at the Poorhouse West in Hamburg, New York. And I told him before I went on stage, I said, look, when we get to the part, Mr. Big, I'll just look over, I go, 1, 2, 3, 4, and just stop dead, and I'll just go.
They'll lay out completely. You'll just keep going.
And then I'll cue you to come back in. It was like, oh, here we go. This is 1972, maybe, or 3. And sure enough, I stopped dead and went to this, all these bass things. I did a few Bach things that I've been working on and learned, you know, and some things that I've worked out in other songs that I was doing behind that people that hadn't noticed yet, you know, because it was in context of other songs. I just counted back in 2, 3, 4, and we ended the song, and that was basically the first time I ever did that.
And it went over.
Yeah, it worked really good. Hendrix did that. I mean, with the unaccompanied solos, he's the first guy I really heard doing unaccompanied solos. So it was kind of, he laid the groundwork for it. And
like Star Spangled Banner, things like that.
Yeah, things like that. We just go wailing away and stuff like that. And then after a while, I'd like be doing, you know, some of Mussorgsky's, you know. You know,
right, pictures at an exhibition.
All little things like that, throwing all in the solo thing, and it was really funny because it was rare for guitarists to do it back then. For sort of bass player, people were completely. Some people didn't like it at all. Hey, we can't dance with this, you know. So, you know, those people eventually weeded away, and we just drew more of another kind of people.
They kind of went off the disco, huh?
Yeah, exactly. They tore the stage down, put a mirror ball up, and that was the end of that. But yeah, that's just basically how it worked. Then I would just do pieces of songs and things. And now it's kind of evolved to a point where I just flail away, and I got some guidelines as to what I do. And solo is, sometimes it's very much like what I used to do a long time ago. Sometimes it's all new. Try and be a little improvisational, but right now we're out touring with Rush, so in front of 15,000 people, you don't necessarily want to take a big chance, but it's fun if you take a little bit of a chance, you know, try something new you've never done before, you know.
Does it have a structure, though?
I play
loosely.
Yeah, I play some wild stuff. I back it down. I play some quiet stuff, and I come back and do some more stuff. You know, and within context, at some point or another, there's various things that I've done throughout my whole life, and every night I'll always do something that I haven't done before or I haven't tried before, some combination of things. So it's always different. The solo is always different, but it has basically the context of, like a lot of classical pieces, you start out with the main theme, you back off and you do a couple sub things and you come back in with a big grandiose finish, you know? So that's pretty much what it is. And then we go right into Addicted and the solo now with a little part, and then Pat comes in and does the drum things, and Paul comes in and we trade some stuff off, and that's our story side.
Another extension of chords that you seem to use a lot is the idea in NV, that one section in your NV solo where you tap chords on.
Yeah, that was back in about 1983 or 82 even. I don't even know where it came from. I was just kind of, I was doing holding a chord and doing a little trill on top of it, just a D major chord. Found out that all those notes there kind of worked. So again, looking at the simplistic point of view that I did and still do sometimes. Now I made the chord a minor, which means this note does not work. This has got to go.
Right.
So it's... That was an accidental move. When I first did that, I had no idea. Another accidental one. That was a C chord here, and I'm playing. Actually, it's a G major chord over a C.
Yeah.
See how that works?
Exactly.
A simple ascension like that. The fingering is kind of tricky. I saw when I did a clinic in Japan, I saw a kid try to do that, and he had the whole thing, but he had these fingerings that were all like,
oh, really?
all over the place. But it's actually, again, a lot of times when you hear something, it sounds more complicated than it really is. When people are watching me play, I know they have a puzzled look on their face, like going, I'm hearing all these notes, but he's not really, doesn't really look like he's doing anything. Because I'm really not. I mean, it's just a way of economy of motion, like we talked about last time.
There's more logic, maybe, in what you're doing than what they're expecting to hear.
Yeah.
They expect it to be tricky, in other words, so they're looking for the tricky way of executing it.
Right, but in actual fact, when you're playing live, you want to keep it as at least tricky for you as possible.
That's
you could probably do some histrionics and acrobatic kind of moves there, but when you're, like, running across the stage, it doesn't always work. So I try to do things that really depend on strength. You can really get a really strong, hard tone on that aren't so weirdly esoteric that it's going to be difficult for you to just summon up at any given time from your imagination.
What are some of the other key points that you like in your NV solo?
There's a couple like...
How did that develop?
That was taken from the Van Halen.
Oh, Mean Street.
That thing there, which I don't want to play too much of to encroach upon Eddie's thing. When I first saw him doing that in 1980, it was part of a solo, and later on he put it into the intro of a song. An amazing piece of music, and it's actually, I think, from what I understand, taken from a bass thing, because Eddie's a great bass player and a good drummer too. It helps out his guitar playing. That's why I urge bass players to learn a little bit about guitar and definitely a lot about drums, because it helps out your playing a lot.
So remember that.
Remember that. So so that tapping thing, because I never did the thumb thing. I can't. I'm just not. I practice it once in a while, but so many other guys have it so much better than I do. Why even bother? You know, just
you probably could, but you got priorities.
Yeah, I would like to, because it's really great. But so I just did a lot of tapping with this finger naturally, because I never even really knew about the thumb stuff because most of the stuff I played didn't require it in most rock bands. Just a way of you're hitting on the octave.
You're getting so much sound, and it looks so light, the way you're playing it.
Well, it's kind of a touch that you get. Your finger actually kind of bounces off. A lot of guys like hold it on there too long. It's just kind of a way of bouncing your fingers both on the right and left hand.
Now, what's happening in your left hand at that point? Aha. And so this upper note section has a pedal kind of effect. It stays put while the other notes below it change.
You're kind of getting that chord there, so you got to kind of stick within the realms of what works with those three notes. So
it gets pretty elaborate.
Yeah, so now anybody watching this can take that and do any kind of chord structure in the world they possibly conceive of.
It should be in one key, similar key, chord changes related.
Or experiment. I can honestly say I've never played that pattern before in my life before this moment here.
And the open strings are a part of it, of course.
Yeah, so you can, the variations are limitless that you can do with it. So, and it originally came from, that thing, and it's just going to extend it all over the neck. So there's a lot of ways you can approach tapping and hammering, and I try to encourage people to be unlimited. And every time you come up with something, understand, like for a long time in my solos, in the old days, I would always just So what that is, kind of a raking, half hammer technique here. Get a really, get a real fast thing out of it. Now,
and you're barring under there too, as
yeah,
well.
I'm holding these notes here, and I'm barring here too. So look how little motion there is for all those notes. And now, and then just about a year ago, I finally realized, hey, why don't I try another chord, only the same technique?
Yeah.
So there's no limit to how many
Exactly.
variations you can do. And now somebody out there that has a better grasp of chord structures than I do can do the same technique. Because once in a while you get into a spot with your hands where they do a certain thing and you do it really well. A little bit of variation, you can change it around. So once you got a real good technique move, learn how to make it more musical.
Right.
Where a lot of guys get this technique thing and they just do technique, 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 you know, all over the place. But realize that that's like your building block. Like when I first did hammer-ons and stuff like that, after a while I realized, oh, you can move that around. That hand, and you can move this hand around too. You can do up the finger. And so there's pretty soon, you know, the whole world, everybody knows what that hammer-ons are all over the place.
Right.
So the same idea with
What about the area of string bending? You'd mentioned that briefly, but could you get a little bit more in depth about your technique, how you do it, and tips on executing?
Yeah, for a bass player to bend strings, a lot of guys don't do it because the bass is heavy strings, but I have a custom set, and I have the G string a little tiny bit lighter, just a tiny bit, 2/1000ths of an inch, I think is what it is. And the E string is a little heavier, because the E string usually is very floppy on any given set of strings. So if to bend strings, like I'll always try to get as many fingers on that string as I can, and have them all bend. So it takes all the pressure. As you can see, little holes that are created. If I hold this note for a second here, see little holes that are created in my fingertips.
Groovy.
Yeah, very groovy. Ooh. Anyway. So those little groovy grooves there, they indicate that the pressure is equally distributed over all three fingers. If you're just doing it with one, you'd have all that pressure pushing on one finger, which may be uncomfortable. Some guys probably can do it that have a lot stronger hands than I do. Sometimes I'll even get all four behind there.
All four of you.
But what I generally tend to do when I get behind something like that, I try to keep as many fingers on it, and I kind of roll my fingers down and push it up that way.
So some movement's coming from the wrist, apparently, too.
I'm actually, good point, because I never even realized that.
It's kind of a leveraging, almost.
Yeah, I'm kind of the vibrato part comes from that. I have these top frets scalloped down on these basses, too, to make a little easier to get underneath there, because on these higher notes, we're going to need a lot of pressure to bend them up. I tend to bend down underneath and push up. So
you're in the scalloped area.
Yeah, for these here. It's not always necessary to do that. I just happen to do that for myself.
It's a little bit more comfortable?
It seemed it. You know, it seems like it makes it, because you don't hit any wood there like you would down here. Hear that wood? Scraping up against it, because I do a lot of high bends on the bass to try and get it to the highest note you can get out of the instrument. So generally the G string gets bent up. The D string is optional. I don't do too much bending on the D string, obviously. And then the A and the E are bent down. And now the E string can really,
boy, that's quite a long ways.
So that's out of tune too now. But you can bend the E string quite a bit. So the lower strings are looser by nature, and the higher strings are tighter. So you kind of have to get underneath these, and you can pull these down.
In the last video, you mentioned a little bit about pinch harmonics, but since then you've elaborated a bit on them, like in the Blame It on My Youth break that you play. It almost sounds like a guitar. Can you talk a little bit more in depth about the way you play artificial pinch harmonics?
Yeah, like as I said in the last video, I guess there's no way to actually hear them now if you hear the record. A lot of it is limited. You can't really do a lot of fast picking because you got to. So as fast as you'll get, as I'll get anyway, somebody else probably do faster. Put it anywhere on the string. There's a harmonic in there. So when you're playing live, you get that real. It's like our sound man in our shows uses that to kind of judge where the bass becomes sometimes the second guitar for thick moves like that while Paul's playing the chords and stuff. I'm doing that.
What would it sound like if you played it without the harmonics, just for contrast? And then with the harmonics? Yeah.
Something like that.
Makes it much more interesting.
Yeah, because it's
colorful.
If you don't really need the note for a
root or something?
Yeah, to establish. And it's also, if you did play like that, it kind of gets to make a lot of frequencies there. So we just kind of cut out the low frequencies and just go for the real high ones again. So it doesn't get in the way of what the guitar is doing or what the singer's singing in a way. So
Are you going for specific placement, though, when you play that? Or?
I think I accidentally get specific placement because what I do is my hand's here, so when I go below this pickup,
So you visualize against the pickup in relation to the pickup?
It's just kind of a natural thing that my hand falls with because you can't do it over the pickup because then I don't have room to reach underneath, and here this big pickup's in my way, so we got one other option right here, so that's kind of... That's where it kind of ends up, natural selection kind of.
Yeah, that's great. I've seen you do something that I've never seen any other bass player do, and that's bend the neck while you're playing it. Could you give us a little bit of a rundown of what you do?
Yeah, I think I first got that. I'm sure a lot of other guys do it. Maybe you got to go out and see more bass players there.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think I got it originally from Pete Townsend, because like the beginning of I Won't Get Fooled Again. See him shake his neck around a little bit live, and I think, it's got to work on bass, forcing guitar, that's generally the rule of thumb. So a lot of times when I do like a harmonic, I'll just kind of get better. And actually, you hit the low note. It's quite down to a D.
Yeah.
But we got to be careful how your bass is connected here.
And now, what's the actual mechanics behind what's going on?
A lot of it has to do with how the strap is together. That's why I used to stretch my strap out all the time. I'd be playing, everything would be fine, like I talked about again in the first video, not to be redundant, but how the strap would change its size, the angles of my hand would change as the bass moved down away from me as the strap got longer. The reason why the strap was getting longer is I was doing all these... So what I'm doing is the strap goes all the way around me, connects here and here, and I'm pushing up against it, and this is the fulcrum.
That's holding in place. Wow, that's quite a change. You can really see the strings go away.
How far down the neck actually... Boy, this broke right now, maybe. So it's kind of a way to simulate the vibrato arm. We used to do like any Hendrix kind of. Get those little things. There's some of that in the NV solo too. As a matter of fact, at one point you hear it going crunch, crunch. It's actually the wood and the screw kind of starting to pop out of the bass because I was. In the heat of the moment there, I was pushing really hard on the bass. Sometimes live I'll just push as hard as I can. And the only thing wrong with it, though, is it sometimes picks the strings up off the pickup, or moves them up away from the pickup so it's not quite as loud. Which I know guitarists had a problem a little bit with a Floyd Rose or vibrato sometimes when they drop it. It lifts the strings up a little bit and it's not as loud, but it's no big deal.
Now, you have to be very careful with the average bass if you're doing a technique like this, don't you?
Yeah, I would say just make sure that if it's a bolt-on, make sure it's really tight, it's really together. Because a lot of times with the old bolt-ons that I had before I got these basses, by pushing, you would make the neck twist sideways in its seat. So you get off stage and say, gee, I wonder why my strings are like this, and they would be way off because the neck would be bent
Or
down.
maybe even before you got off stage, huh?
Yeah, well, you're trying to do that last note and it's going... nothing's working. But that's the idea. Just make sure the bass is together, but a strong strap. Because somebody gave me one of those flexible straps one time. Oh my God, what a nightmare that was. I was on stage trying to play this bass one time, and I couldn't find anything, and the bass was flat on nothing at all. So, I mean, you know, to each his own, but...
do you recommend, you had a way of putting the neck on the bass that really kept it stable. Could you sort of pass that on if you have a normal bass?
Yeah, well, I lay it down flat and sometimes like on a cushion or a chair or something and stand on it. So that
stand on it literally?
Yeah, so that the joint between the neck and the body is compressed as hard as it can be without the screws. Then torque the screws down, and then you've generally got a pretty tight neck joint. It's going to move around. All bolt-on necks are going to move around a little bit. They made a special aluminum extension that goes underneath the body here to prevent that on this particular bass, but you know, you're bound to get some move. It won't hurt anything, though. It's, you know, just snap it back.
It's virtually indestructible.
Take it to the bass chiropractor, and he'll snap it right back in for you.
What in your mind is the value, if there is any, in learning licks per se?
Well, every player at some point slows a record down or learns a guitar lick. I mean, every guitar player in the world, when they first heard Chuck Berry, learned all the little Chuck Berry little things, you know. So you gotta, at some point, you do that. Unfortunately now, a lot of people isolate into just licks, and it's just got to learn those licks and more licks, and there's another guy behind me learning a little faster licks, so everybody has it in him. The next thing you know, everybody's doing these lick things, and it's going nowhere. The point of a lick is to give you an idea of a pattern of fingering that creates a certain feel or an idea. And it is a lick that you learn off a record is a little seed, and you just plant it in your mind and just let it grow. Most of the things I know now were pulled off of rock, or Richie Blackmore, or Hendrix heavily, some Frank Zappa, you name it. You know, I've gone through that before.
Melting pot.
Yeah. So you learn licks and you put them all together, and the value is in the song always. And the licks are just there to embellish a song or to make a song work. I mean, when you hear, you know what song that is. I don't even have to say automatically. People are going out there going, what song was it anyway? But you know what I mean. I mean, you play a real recognizable thing. That's part of a song. It's a little melody thing that it's some value. But I still learn licks to this day. I sit down, I'll pull things off records, or sit down and work out little things and moves like that. When I play, that stuff is kind of put in the background, and you just kind of.
Do you get selective with it?
Yeah. There's some things that work, some things that don't. So you gotta stick with that. Which, because I can do a lot of things that I won't do on stage sometimes now. I'll do a lot of things that I'm not fully comfortable with going up there yet. But, yeah, there's a million ways to do it. You can learn a bunch of licks. You can play in a blues band, a rock band, an R&B band, a soul, any kind of band in the world, country, western, you name it. And there's a million ways to do it. So, you know, it would be ridiculous for me to sit here and pontificate about what is the way. But there's certainly no harm in learning. I remember pulling Richie Blackmore licks right off the record, like Strange Kind of Woman had this real cool lick, and I said, it's like, oh, the coolest guitar lick, and I just learned it. And I never used it ever. But it's just the idea that I know that tone, those tone centers, and that move around. I've done it, and I know what to do with my hands. So it's probably influenced me unknowingly. I've never actually used the lick.
Maybe develop a fingering pattern out of it or something.
Exactly. So, and a lot of times now I'll learn things that I know I'll never use. You have to sit down with a bluegrass record and do some country picking kind of licks and stuff like that.
You do those kinds of things.
Sure, yeah, you'll never use them, but it'll just give you a different point of view on what you're looking at now. You know, just a different thing.
And kind of more broadening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm not necessarily into that kind of music, but just listen once in a while, just pulls you off course a bit and puts you on another one, whatever it may be.
One of your main, the main points that you've stressed many times over is the ability for a bass player to play well with a drummer. Exactly. Lock into a rhythm section, and that is really one of your main soapboxes. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we, you know, as we're fortunate today, I dragged Pat, my drummer from Mr. Big, Pat Torpy, down. We dragged him kicking and screaming down here to help us out today. And he's a real good drummer for me to play with because his timing is great, the tone of his kit is good, he's got a real command. Very similar player to the way I am in that he grew up playing a million clubs, a million copy tunes, and knows a million songs. and we work really well together. We have like a real instinct where I look at him, he looks at me. We know what we're talking about. We know when we can imply things just by kind of a glance what it's supposed to be. So it's been real helpful for me to play with him. So you know, what we'd like to illustrate by doing the following is just kind of show what happens when bass and drums get together. You know, I don't know if many other people have thought of the idea of the rhythm section as a single entity, because you just think of there's a bass player and here's a drummer, but you have to realize that there are two together that makes one. And the closer entwined you are and the better you work off each other, the better the rhythm section is going to be.
There's a chemistry there, right?
Exactly. So we, in forming Mr. Big, it was kind of neat because I've been through a lot of bands, a lot of things. It was kind of neat to see it evolve from the beginning to the band, to the songs, actually picking up, going to a record store and going, hey, look, here's our CD. It's unbelievable, you know, that work from the first phone call to actually seeing the thing there. So now it's really easy for me to see that development because it's just happened with a new guy, with a new drummer and a new band. So it's very fresh for both of us. We both learned a lot of each other. We've learned a lot off Eric Martin, a singer, and Paul Gilbert, a guitar player, respectively. And it's a chance for us now to sit down, bass and drums, and kind of just go over some things, show you how we came up with an idea for a song, what works, what doesn't work, you know, what we kind of move towards, how things develop from
how to develop grooves.
Yeah, how to just make things work. And Pat has some good insights on how he does that too, which have been valuable to me. And there he is.
Great, man.
It's Wolf Marshall.
You guys are cooking. You guys are
Holy
cooking
cow.
as usual.
All right.
Well, let me ask you a few things about this tune. First of all, what the heck is it?
Well, actually, it's a song our singer Eric Martin wrote, and it's got a lot of changes in it that he basically did on piano with voice first, which gave Pat and I the opportunity to, you know, kind of have fun with a lot of the changes and moves around. As you notice, like, you know, some different textures.
There
and
sure is, yeah.
some parts where it goes up and some parts where it goes down.
It's interesting, in the beginning you start with a texture like harmonics and sort of an unusual feel compared to the solid eighths.
Yeah, it's kind of a way. It's a way to do those harmonics, and it's almost kind of like a little keyboard thing.
Right, has
that
that
happens.
feel.
I use harmonics a lot to kind of mimic what a keyboard would do. Sometimes I get the impression I'm not a keyboard player. You can hit a chord and then kind of hold it and move around with your right hand. I guess that's how to play the piano. Hold a chord and then move your right hand around.
Simple way to do it. Well, let me ask you about the solid groove of the verse.
Yeah. Well, basically, we're just chunking along. This is the body of the song, and it's just a spot for the singer to sing his thing, and which rhymes, incidentally. And we just are hanging onto the thing underneath him, basically, you know.
You're helping to punctuate it by adding some of the accents of the octave skips, right?
Yeah, with the snare drum.
Yeah, could you explain that interaction?
Yeah, just take it from Honeymoon's Over there. Right. Show. That's the idea. Basically, what I do, just because, well, Pat and I rehearse alone. Sometimes a lot of the rest of the band, like this right here, we go through the whole song just like as you've heard it there. And I just, since I do a lot of that octave thing, you're playing along with the bass drum. Why not hit the high?
Adds a little punch to it.
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of, you know, it makes the low octave the bass drum and the high octave the snare drum on the bass.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. Now let me ask you about those punches that you do going into the B flat and the C chords. It's like a little anticipated. Was the song written that way with those in mind, or was that created as part of the arrangement?
I don't know. Did we come up with that after the fact?
I don't even know what he's talking about.
B flat.
Where do we go from here? That part.
That was part of the
It might have been written in there.
part of the way Eric was constructed the song. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's worked around the vocal line.
Yeah.
The where do we go from here? It moves around. A lot of times, especially if a singer writes a song, it's usually arranged a lot more intelligently than if someone who's not singing it writes it, because you're thinking as a vocalist where you got to put your accents and do your thing there. So they usually make more sense. Like Paul McCartney being a singer as a bass player, his arrangements tend to make sense. Geddy Lee, Phil Lynott, Doug Pinnick from King's X, bass players that sing, they always kind of have that.
And you put some octave skips in that part as well, and sometimes chords?
Yeah, sometimes when we go, the where do we go from here part, I have to...
Gives it more beef.
Yeah, it's because it's a real big blast there, so when the chord basically is just octaves with the fifth in between. I use that a lot and for endings and stuff. Yeah, bass bar chords.
Right. Let me ask you about the change of feel in the pre-chorus, where it seems to have a halftime feel.
I think Eric just when he wrote the song, he had the melody, and it just the way the melody and the chords happened, it seemed that was proper to do.
Exactly.
I mean, it seemed to me that was hey, it makes sense. It seems like that's what we
It's
did.
a good illustration of halftime feel, though, how it works in rock as a technique. Coming straight out of that into eighth notes is very effective.
Because what we hear when we heard it was just Eric singing it and playing the piano. So we kind of basically, we knew where one was and where the accents were. We just kind of filled in the blanks.
Well, just for a reference, could you play that part going into the chorus so we could show the transition into solid eighths from a halftime feel?
1 minute after midnight.
Okay. That halftime.
Good morning.
And a lot of times when there's a lot of space in the drum part, you want to go right with them.
Exactly.
You know, especially if it's a vocal part. You don't necessarily want to be playing a lot of weirdo stuff in there.
The chorus is a return back to that eighth note feel, the main groove.
Yeah, and then again, timing-wise, it pulls you out of the chunk, 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 and backs you off for a minute, and then it gives it to you again. Or if the whole song was just chunking away, it would kind of lose its effectiveness because there's too much of it. You back off and then come back with it again. It's, you know, again, it's kind of a classical, or a classic, rather, way of arrangements. You know, once you're doing something for a while, you back out of it, and then bring it in again. And since you've already heard it earlier in the song, it kind of refamiliarizes with where you're going. So when we come back in with the chorus part where you're singing rock and roll over, it's like, oh, I've heard this group before. I know what you're talking about. You know, it's kind of a way to pull out. And
now, how do you conceive of what happens behind the guitar solo?
Well, for me, whenever the guitar, you pull the cymbals up on that a little bit. You go that ride cymbal? Yeah.
Good ride cymbal. Pretty splashy. You know,
Yeah,
lots of noise. Lots of
try to-
White Album.
Yeah, right.
Driving.
Yeah.
You try to fill without doing a lot of, I try to fill without doing a lot of extra notes. Like when normally I'm just chugging on the G note there in that part there, you know, the guitar solo. I'll just play it harder and beefier because there's no rhythm guitar. And all the arrangements I've mostly done in most bands I've ever been in, there's never been a rhythm guitar player or a keyboard player.
Gives you kind of a free counterpoint, huh?
Yeah, so it gives you a chance to kind of hit the chords and open it up, but you want to hear the solo, so you're going to back off, and especially if you stay low and he's soloing high. You got the distance in frequency that they don't crowd each other up.
That's a good point.
I think that's why a lot of AC/DC records sound so good, is the singer singing way high, and the band is this huge band underneath, and the vocals stick out like a sore thumb, you know. And you kind of keep that in mind when, you know, the guitarist it's a thinner sounding instrument than a bass. So if the bass is low and the guitarist is doing this thing, you don't get in his way. And then once in a while, if I move up around, and Paul will catch it and follow it, and you know, do a guitar thing on it. It's a way of interweaving it.
Speaking of fills, now you do quite a bit of fills in the out chorus sections.
Yeah.
That's a really dramatic thing where you start building towards a big finish.
Yeah, the whole song, almost all the songs we do, and yeah, almost every song that there is, as you're getting towards the end, you're bringing it up. Everything comes up. Pat goes to more open hi-hat, a more higher cymbal. Sometimes he rides in the crash cymbal, you know, bring the whole kit up, bring the more of everything, you know, because you try and build the whole song slowly up to kind of a peak, so when you end it, you end on a high point.
That's right.
So as I'm, in the chorus is out, I'll do more fills.
Pretty free with them too, right?
Yeah, yeah, because Paul is playing more. I mean, you've already heard the rock and roll over again, you know, a million times, so you know it's there. It's like the first time you hear it, and there's all kinds of stuff underneath it. You what did they say? You know, you don't really, you don't catch it. It kind of goes by you. Where if you wait until it's established as the part of the song, and then later on you can have fun with it.
But there's also a good structure to it. It seems to happen. Your fill is every fourth bar.
Yeah,
So
that's
you
kind
have
of standard.
two, 3 bars of accompaniment, nice strong finish into each new measure.
Yeah, it's like each 4 bars is a little piece on its own. Starts out, the guitar solo, the guitar solo gets to the very end, and do a little thing, and then start over again, and then get to the end, do another little turnaround, you know, and it just kind of time marches on.
Very rhythmically effective, though.
All right.
Yeah. Well, what are we going to do next? Which tune would you like to show us next?
Well, there's another tune that we do off the record, which is kind of a swingier feel, if you will. And it's a song that, actually, Paul wrote the music for it, and we all worked it out as a band first. And I was talking before about when a singer sings a song, you usually arrange around the vocals. Well, we sent the tape up to him up in San Francisco, and we never thought, you know, we kind of put it at the end of the tape because we figured, we don't know if Eric would write vocals to this song because there's a lot of movement around in it. And he really shined on it. He was really able to weave lyrics into spots that we didn't expect it at all. And it came out, once we did, like I said, for the record, we did about 30 songs that we had finished. This is certainly one of our favorites because he just managed to weave these vocals and all these musical movement things, and it made all kinds of sense. It's got kind of a swing, rock swing to it, you know. Well,
let's hear that and come back and talk about it.
All right.
Cool.
That's Merciless.
Yeah.
Merkhouse.
Take.
Merciless.
Good take. It was merciless, too. The performance of it was merciless.
We had a reviewer spell it Merkiles one time, so we always call it Merkiles.
Merkiles. I love it. Is that in this country?
Believe it or not, yes.
What's the difference between the way you play this, the swing feel, and what would be the normal straight-ahead 4/4 feel?
Well, swing, how do you describe what swing, to make something swing?
I think what the best way to describe it is there's this underlying triplet feel that's going on. That's not always stated, but it's there.
Like in...
Right.
That kind of
It's
triplet?
like if you, instead of going, you go... See, the downbeat and the backbeat happen on the same time, but it's what's in between them and what's implied is a triplet thing.
Well, for the fun of it, why don't we hear what it would sound like straight feel, and then alternate the parts and see how lame it can get if you don't play swing together.
Well, I don't think...
What do we do
we've
first?
played it pretty lame already.
Yeah,
I mean,
we know the lame
peaked,
way.
We've peaked on the lame version of it.
Chorus. 2, 3, 4.
That is awfully...
That's awful lame.
It's
Awfully
awfully
tired.
lame, too. It's,
Lame with a capital M.
Let's add some swing feel to it now and see
Okay.
so we can get a back-to-back difference.
go ahead, sing.
1, 2, 3.
Like that.
That definitely states the case, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's the difference between straight and swing. Because it's funny, because a lot of... You can play a lot of rock stuff that's straight and play it swingy, just so you can play it reggae-ish or, you know, any other the variations that you can... Any other variation buttons you got on your drum machine. Samba version of it. But
Now, I noticed there's a lot of use of space in the verses. You really have a lot of space between the riffs
Yeah.
to give room for the vocal.
yeah, and there's a little guitar lick in there that plays with the vocals. Goes da 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 da, you know, a little thing in there. So
You take advantage of some of that space and nice putting in some good, neat noises.
once in a while, I'll do a little with the harmonic or
Right.
guitar solos. That
Yeah, I've often wondered how that's
however
done.
many times I do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a little thing to throw in there for the hell of it, because it doesn't necessarily interfere with the guitar part. It's just kind of almost like a little percussive, like if you had a little kind of a little bell
It's
thing.
19, by the way. That's how
19.
many times you go. Boom, it's 19.
Now, this is a good one that illustrates neck bending and string bending techniques. Can you show us some of those in context where you think they belong in this song?
At that one part where he sings "Strut Your Stuff," that it's always you know, just you can hold it out like that, or you can do the dramatic. And of course, the ticket buyers will be more interested in the dramatic version, so we opt for that automatically. And as far as string bending goes, I do.
Similar to
yeah.
the riff, you'd bend some
Again,
notes.
when we stop a couple times, I do a little of the pinch harmonic just bend. And that, each one I'm bending a D up to an E, pinching a harmonic in it. So that's pretty much the thing. And live, a lot of times, if there's a spot, I'll just, because when you're playing live, you're not thinking about the song at all. You're just kind of performing, and you know,
You're in that environment.
Yeah, it's the moment. So a lot of times I'll do things, and a lot of times I'll do things I don't even realize I'm doing them for 3 or 4 shows in a row, and then I'll finally catch it, and then remember it, and then it'll become part of the band, or part of the show there, or part of the song, you know.
What about behind the guitar solo?
Yeah, well, I bring it up again instead of cutting it off real staccato.
Just straight.
What's some of the music words you can use that we're cutting it off real fast?
Well, staccato's good.
Staccato, see, I knew that. And I kind of let things hang a little bit more. Just to fill in the fact that the guitar's not playing the chords
Create
anymore.
more dramatic
He's soloing.
feel.
Yeah, so it brings the beef up behind the soul a lot more.
And at the end of it, you have that tremendous double-handed fill. It's a good space for the two-measure fill before you go back into the chorus.
Just basically
Right.
one of those things, and then you just hold that high A. And
Again, very effective in that spot.
it's a spot that's open, and there's just like an echo vocal thing going on there, and we're waiting to come back to the song, so hey, there's a hole there, I think I'll jump in it.
What kind of tips and guidance can you give, like a young rhythm section? It's already decided. A drummer is working with a bassist working with a drummer. They want to lock into playing together and developing good skills together as a team. Can you give them what kind of advice?
The first guy I watch, as I said, in a band is a drummer. And it's really good to really closely tie in. When Pat and I were rehearsing, we're right close to each other and everything, as I said. And it's good for young guys, new guys, when they're getting together, first band, or even if you've been around for a long time, you're getting a new guy in the band. It's good to just kind of pay attention to what's going on, or really, instead of looking at yourself, look at what's going on there. Hopefully, the band will develop the kind of communication amongst each other that will be conducive to being able to stick together for a long time, because you know each other musically. The personal thing comes a lot easier too, and it also helps out when you're songwriting and arranging and doing all your business and being on the road. Just that communication within the band is the thing that really holds it together. And though it's abstract, I do personally believe that the audience, even if they don't know they're seeing it, they do perceive it somehow.